At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Chuck, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. And folks, just so you know, we had a chat, what was it, about a month ago? And
About a month ago, yeah.
And I had some issues on my end with the sound system, and it's like we couldn't do it. And so we have rescheduled, and I'm really excited about this because our conversation before was so enlightening, and I really appreciate this book that you've written and the concepts that you've come up with. So what I'd love for you to do is share with the audience who you are and what motivated you to write the book, The Art of Conscious Communication.
The Art of Conscious Conversations.
Or conversation,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, who am I? That's a big question.
I know. We all ask ourselves that, don't we?
Yeah. Who am I? Anyway. Well, I'd say writing the book was my fourth career. I was originally a musician. I was an architect in Boston for 20 years, and I changed careers when I started studying language and leadership. And so that's sort of how that all evolved. And interesting, just to underscore that, is I never was rejecting the previous profession. I was more fell in love with a new one, and I couldn't help myself. So I ended up doing leadership coaching and advising for the last 25, 30 years at large corporations with the executives and their teams. And then the book came about because some of my clients said, I love all the work we're doing, but I don't know how to connect the dots. And is there a book I can read? And I realized there's a lot of different books, but the work we were doing was a compilation of all those. So I decided maybe I can put all the pieces together. And that's what inspired me to write the book.
All right. And you've actually put four pieces together. What are they?
Briefly. So the thing that connects all those different pieces, one client says, how do I connect the dots? Right. That stuck with me. And then I realized when I was studying the ontology of language that there's four basic types of conversations that we're in all the time, but we're not aware of those. And those four conversations, storytelling, collaboration, creativity, and commitment conversations, are the structure that hold all the different tools and practices that help us be better in our communications.
Okay. And, as we look at what the problem is, and I want to go into that, first of all, what is the issue? What is the problem that you have experienced through your many years of working with companies and individuals that you found need this type of help? What are the issues that come up with people in general?
So in general, I think we are in conversations all the time. It's the one human tool that we have across the globe, conversations. And yet we adopt our conversational patterns unconsciously through our culture, our family. So we learn to talk, we mimic our families, we mimic our cultures, and then we learn through experience. So we're in conversation often on autopilot without understanding them as deeply as we can. And so when we're on autopilot, we are playing out our pattern, but not always to our benefit or to the creativity of to the generation of a good conversation. So in some ways, it's like being we are in conversations, but we don't really know how they work. And so my book is trying to say, let's take it apart a little bit. Let's look deeply into it, how they work and what we can learn from each kind of conversation.
Well, and it's interesting as we look at what's going on in the country, in the U.S. right now. Those conversations are not working real well.
Not at all. If I could stick my book under the pillow of every politician, I would.
Wouldn't that be nice? But even as we look at divorce rates, as we look at challenges that parents have with their children and vice versa,
Yep.
as we look at all of that, recognizing that conversation, and I said communication, but it's conversation that creates that communication, that
Yep.
becomes the major issue. And, and we'll get into this maybe a little bit later if we have time, but I was thinking today, as I was re-listening to a little bit of our conversation before, is
Hmm.
that even the conversation we have with ourselves
Yes.
and
Right.
our lives. And so as we go through this, we'll talk about those on different levels. But at this point in time, let's go have you explain number one, what are the individual areas? You talked about storytelling, collaborative,
Hmm.
creative, commitment. Let's go through each one of those to begin with. Also, at the beginning
Okay.
of your book, you talked about ego, and I'm trying to figure out how that fits in. So if you can fit that in and let me know where that fits in, I want to get into that conversation too.
Okay. Great. So I'll do a brief explanation of each conversation.
Okay.
And if you want to do a dive into each one, just interrupt me. Or if you have a question about each one, just interrupt
Yeah.
me.
We'll do a dive
Um,
after you've explained them all.
okay, well, I'll do a brief explanation. So storytelling is primary. Um, I say that because that's how we live life. That's how humans live. We live through stories. Um, and Yuval Harari's book *Sapiens* it does a great history lesson in how this evolved, so that law is a story and money is a story, but they stick because we all agree on them. We all agree that the dollar is worth X. But anyway, so in our personal lives, we also have stories. We have stories about ourselves, and we have stories about other people. Some are helpful, some are harmful. The helpful ones, we connect with people, we love people, we have good relationships. The harmful ones hold us back individually because we aren't living up to our potential, or they do damage to a relationship. So, exploring our stories and the storytelling conversation is primary because it helps us do all the other conversations better. Now, ego comes in because the ego loves our stories, loves our beliefs and the package that we have about how we see the world, and convinces us that, yeah, you're right, you're right, and you should fight for your position. However, it's sort of is a constricting element. Ego sort of gets us to be tight and hold on to our perspectives and beliefs, and so we aren't as open as we could be, open mind, open heart. Um, but when we begin to look at them and we increase our awareness, ego stories are like put us in. Ego is like putting it as foggy. It gets us in the fog. We identify with our positions and we can't see very much. When we become aware of our stories, that's like bringing light to the situation. So now we can say, oh, I have that a story I adopted from my dad, or I'm behaving that way because that's what I was taught to do. And so then we have a chance to change. So storytelling is very personal, and it's very profound. Um, Now, as we do that work, the next conversation, which is relational, the collaborative conversation is the conversation between you and I, or me and five people, or me and 10 people in a meeting. That's relational because everybody now is bringing their story to the table. And so we've all been in meetings where everyone has their perspective and there's a lot of disagreement around the room. But the real art of collaboration conversations is our ability to advocate with an open hand instead of a fist, and to listen in a way that we can really absorb other people, ask good questions, and learn from one another. So the basic tools there are open advocacy and open inquiry versus closed advocacy and closed inquiry. So when we do that collaborative thing, we learn from each other, and we get smart together instead of getting dumb together. And it's just another way of sort of opening our minds, and it takes humility and it takes vulnerability. If we do that conversation well, we are in a creative conversation where we generate ideas. ideas that bubble up out of an open space conversation, a good collaborative conversation. We've all had that experience in a meeting or with someone where we're talking, and all of a sudden, because we're sharing ideas, an idea bubbles up and says, "Oh, I never thought of it that way. We could do X." And that came out of the collaborative conversation because we were both open and ideas are available to us. So the creative conversation is about relational, but it's also personal in that do we exercise our right brain? Do we exercise our creative self? Do we allow ourselves to dream about possibilities or to wonder what ifs? So that's an interesting conversation because it's relational and personal. And then if we do all those conversations well, ideally we go to a commitment conversation, which is really the action conversation. It's how we coordinate getting things done with other people. So it's very relevant to our everyday life, from the kitchen sink to the boardroom. Yet that is a complex conversation that we don't understand, and we tend to do it in a sloppy manner. So we make promises we shouldn't make. We make promises we can't keep. We make promises that break, and then that is a precursor to losing trust in people. So that action conversation, we love it, but we don't do it well.
Well, and I love how you got step by step, and I think it's fascinating that, if you haven't been able to accomplish step number one, which is the storytelling, you're not able to move into step number two. And do you have any specific examples that you could share with the audience? I know I have a couple, but let's see if you do.
Yeah.
Where people were experiencing that challenge of storytelling and what the effect was on that relationship.
I have a personal story that I'm willing to share. It's in the book, actually. And that is, I grew up with a step grandfather who was a bit of a redneck, which means super conservative and racist. But I had three sisters. I was the younger son. Later I had a brother. But so in my growing up, when I showed emotions or cried like my sisters, or I didn't want to shoot the deer, or I didn't want to do something that was in his eyes manly, he constantly told me I wasn't a big enough man. So as a young boy with an authority figure telling me that, I unconsciously adopted that story. That story became a really internal dialogue I had with myself that was very harmful, because no matter what I was doing, and I had some great successes, but no matter what I was doing, that was always nagging in the back of my mind. Oh, it's not good enough. You're not big enough. You're not man enough. You're not strong enough. And it wasn't until I busted that story by investigating facts and saying, wait a minute, that's his idea of what a man is, but I no longer need to adopt his idea.
Well, and
that was life changing.
Yeah. How did that affect your communication and your conversations with other people? That very issue that I'm not good enough.
Yeah. Well, it lifts sort of an internal filter that always has you feeling a little less confident, or a lot less confident, or it lifts some barrier that allows you to be totally who you are and be comfortable in your own skin. And then you can be open in dialogue and open in conversation and more vulnerable because you're confident in your skin. So it's sort of like a lifting a veil of suppression. Well, if that makes sense.
It does. And, as you were talking about ego, one of the things that came to my mind is, because I think we've all experienced, to one degree or another, I'm not good enough. We've all kind of developed that subconscious concept for whatever reason. And oftentimes, and this is just the thought that I had, how often is it that ego then is saying, I'm going to prove that I am right. I'm going to prove that I am good enough. And therefore that ego gets in our way because we're not willing to be able to move that ego to the side and listen.
That's right. Yes, right. Exactly. So when we grow up learning to advocate and have strong positions and have answers and be smart and all of that jazz. So we have these ideas about the world and beliefs and perspectives, but we tend to get identified with them. And that's what our ego does. It keeps us identified with that. And until we can sort of step out, like I said, awareness is like the separation. Now I can be out here and I can be a witness to my thinking. And then from there, I can say I can change that. But if we're identified with it, we're going to defend it to death. And our
Yeah.
ego is there to help us do that. So the awareness sort of brings the light and brings the opportunity to go, wait a minute, I don't have to do that. I can do this.
Well, and one of the stories I want to share, and I shared with you before, but
Mhm.
I have a neighbor that dropped by where I was back in the U.S. for a week or so, and I had a neighbor drop by and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And we started talking, and just really a friendly guy, good friend, and so forth. And we were chatting a little bit, and I said, "Hey, I didn't see you at church last Sunday." And he goes, "Yeah." And I'm going, "Okay." I said, "So what's up?" He says, "Well, the people there just, I'm not comfortable with the way
Mhm.
they think, a lot of them." And I'm going, "Really?" And I started to get an
Mhm.
idea of what it was all about. But it's like,
Mhm.
"So tell me about it." And so he started to share with me that his particular political thinking and beliefs were such that was very opposite of the majority of the people that we both
Mhm.
knew at church.
Mhm.
And as I was asking him, and I was trying to, at least get into the collaborative part, but as I was asking
Mhm.
him
Good.
about that, it's like, well, this is what's happening, and this is what's happening, and I'm going, whoa, whoa, wait a minute, what about this, and what about that? Oh, that's just fake news. And then he just went on and on and on,
Oh, wow.
leaning a little bit more towards the left, and I thought to myself, how sad is it that we can allow this ego, we can allow this situation to occur to where it literally affects our life in a negative way? It starts to
Mhm.
eliminate friendships potentially
Mhm.
that could be so
Mhm.
valuable. And in some ways, it literally changes how we live our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that identity, that clenching, to our perspective or clenching to our identity, then we can't be open. We can't listen. We can't absorb. And that's part of the work. And that's why it takes courage to look like, do I really, you know, there's only three things in stories. There's facts, which is debatable these days, according to some people. There,
Right.
there's there's our emotions, and then there's our opinions. And so our emotions are a sign that we should be investigating our thinking, because it was Proust that said our emotions are a physical upheaval of our thinking.
Yes.
Right. So we have an emotion, and then there's, when we look at it, take the courage to look at it, we go underneath and go, why am I angry? Why am I disappointed? Why am I frustrated? Well, there's a story there. They shouldn't treat me that way. He shouldn't do that. Women shouldn't behave that way. Men shouldn't treat women that way. We have these stories, and I'm not saying they're good or bad, and I'm not saying get rid of them, but investigate them. Because as soon as we have a look at them, then we're free and we can change them, or we can adopt, right?
Well,
So those are signs to
yeah.
look at our thinking. And then facts are facts, no matter what we've experienced the last 10 years or so. But opinions is where things get messy, because our opinions are our beliefs and everything we've accumulated over time, um, and that we get cling to, that we get attached to.
Well, and as you talked about that, and you talked about awareness, you used the word awareness and courage. And what comes to my mind is, and this has been a question in my mind for a long time, how do we help
Mm.
people, or how do we as individuals help ourselves to really become aware? How do we get to the point where we can say to ourselves, you know what? I'm allowing a story to affect my relationship with others. I'm allowing a story
Yes.
to affect my conversation with others. How do we become aware And how do we develop the courage to go, okay, I'm aware. Now I know I need to do something about it.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a couple steps. One step is the courage is to acknowledge that our story is not the truth, that our opinion is not the truth,
Okay.
because the truth is a big subject, a whole podcast we could have on. But we can start saying, wait a minute, my opinion isn't the truth, so what do I have? So I have my emotional feelings, I have my thinking. What are the facts? Let's ground ourselves in facts that you and I couldn't disagree on. you know and then we have the willingness to say, okay, my opinion is made up of certain things. And in my book, I have these 4 quintessential questions that weave through each conversation. That's a great shortcut for investigating our own stories and for helping other people share theirs. And that the way I like to think of it is that we come into a conversation, we're attached to our position like a fist. And with these 4 questions, we can slowly open our hand by the 4 questions, and we're in a conversation sharing the thinking under our opinion or under our judgment, rather than just clinging to the judgment and the opinion. So by that opening our hand, we are being humble. We're saying my story is a story, but it's not the story. And so then we can invite other people to do the same. So I'm happy to share those 4 questions.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what are those 4 questions we need to ask ourselves? And that's really at the basis of storytelling, isn't it? At that level.
That's right. At that level, if we look at our emotions and say, okay, there's a story under our emotions, and then we check the facts, the next thing to do is let's take apart our opinions and our judgments that have us sort of stuck, or have us feeling rigid. So the 4 questions to open our hand is, first is, every judgment we have is there's a desire underneath. Something's happening that we didn't want to have happen, or we want something to happen that we have no control over in the future. Desires can be a good thing because they can create goals and they can inspire us to do things, but they're also traps when we have a desire that doesn't align with reality. And so it's always there in the background, but we forget often to surface it and share it. It's a powerful piece. I'll go through them quickly because they each could have more depth. The second is concerns. So every opinion we have a concern that's based in time. What's going to happen next week? I don't want tomorrow to feel like today. And concerns are, we all have concerns, but often in difficult conversations attached to our position, we forget to share our concern. I'm concerned that X might happen if we don't do Y. And that's a very different conversation because no one can sort of argue with your concern. They might have a different concern, but they can't argue with it. The third question is questions of authority. Every relationship we're in, with kids, with partners, with our colleagues, with our bosses, with our community, we give different people's voices different levels of authority. So these are power issues. It's very obvious in hierarchies because there's a man-made hierarchy that says you have more power than you, more stripes than I do, so I got to listen to what you say. That's very obvious. It creates its own set of problems inside corporations and inside leadership, right? But every conversation we have has power issues involved. Even with friends, some friends we give if they think we aren't doing something well, one person we might say, well, I'm interested to know, why do you think that? Another friend might say that, and we just brush them off because we don't give their opinion much authority. So there's always playing out in every conversation. It's good to check in with ourselves and say, are there power issues at play? And the last one is lovely because it's everywhere. Every judgment we have, every opinion we have is based on our standards. And standards is an umbrella word for our values, our morals, what's right, wrong, good, bad, ugly, pretty, all those things. It's a package deal that says every judgment you have Ask yourself, what standard am I holding that's allowing me to say he's being an idiot, or I'm not good enough, or she shouldn't behave that way? What is the standard underneath? We did not adopt most of our standards. I'm sorry, we did not consciously adopt our standards. We adopted them through our families and our cultures, and so then we live them, but often they get us in trouble because we aren't willing to investigate them. So
Well,
those four things are a really good way to get. What I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, what are my desires? What are my concerns? Are there power issues? What are my standards? I'm opening my hand and I'm sharing my thinking, which is why I say it can feel vulnerable.
well, and as you get to standards, the thing that comes to my mind is AI. And what happens now is that, if we're on Facebook, if we're on anything, or if we're listening to news, we will
Yes.
tend to have reinforced to our mind the very thing that we tend to listen to. And so we keep getting reinforced that, yeah, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. This is the standard, this is
Yes.
the correct standard, when in fact, it may or may not be. As you said, truth at this point in time is really a tough thing to define.
Yeah. 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 So we should remember that, it's very easy because of our ears and how we've learned to listen, that we do not make a distinction between facts and opinions, or in the case you brought up, facts and standards. Our standards are just what's right or wrong. It doesn't mean that we necessarily have the truth of the matter, right?
Yeah.
So investigate the facts and then go, what is my standard? Often do, not often, but I used to do some courses with women around communication and conversations with men, and we would get to standards. If I was teaching about standards, I would ask the room, so how many of you, if you leave home and the beds aren't made, you feel like you're not a good enough wife, not a good enough husband, not a good enough wife, not a good enough mother? And most hands would go up.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, now, no judgment. However, my only question is, where, from whom, how did you adopt that standard? And then when they look, they go, oh yeah, well, that's what my mother taught me. That's what my grandmother insisted on. That's whatever. So it's fine. You can hold that standard. But if you hold it as a standard and not the truth, you might have to rush off to work one day and not have the beds made, or not, the kids don't make their beds, but you don't have to carry the burden of believing that you're a bad mom because you did that.
Well, that's true. And what's interesting to me is, we've spent a huge amount of time just on that basic storytelling, because without overcoming that foundational issue, we cannot
Right.
move into the collaborative. And then as we move into the collaborative, again, that's where the ego, at least in my mind, the ego comes in. Because if you're on opposite sides of me, let's say politically, and you want to start sharing your issues, first thing my ego is going to do is, oh, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. This is what's right.
That's right.
Whereas if we're both in that mentality of, you know what, I really want to have a conversation because I really want to maintain a friendship here. And it's like, so I'm going to listen and I'm going to be open, and I may ask some questions, but they're not antagonistic questions, just helping me
Right.
to understand. And is that where the collaboration comes in?
Yeah, the two basic tools of a good collaborative conversation is open advocacy and open inquiry. And by to understand that, the opposite is we're trained to be closed advocates or non-productive at. We're trained to sort of defend our position and defend it. And in fact, we're trained that way from school on to have the answer. We're not trained to ask questions, right? So the difference between closed advocacy and open advocacy is really that willingness to share our thinking underneath our position, to reveal our thinking. That's the humble vulnerability part. On the other side of the equation, the inquiry is, rather than asking questions to prove them wrong, to prove my point right, We ask questions to truly understand the other person's position. And guess what? The 4 questions are a great shortcut recipe for asking good questions. So if we were in a disagreement around politics, I could say, what's your desire here? What are you trying to accomplish? What's the goal in your position? Or what are you concerned about? What's your deepest concern about this issue? Or what are your standards? Whether we're talking about abortion or gun control, or what are your standards for making this judgment? So what we're doing when we ask good questions is we're helping other people open their hand and reveal their thinking. Now, that doesn't always work because some people just can't open their fist. It's too scary. It's too, vulnerable. But many people, it's if you do it, they'll do it. There's an open heart to open heart. But you don't always get that. But you do your best by asking the good questions.
Well, and I appreciate what you said, because when you first were saying asking questions, I'm thinking, okay, so let me ask you a question. What do you think about this? The fact that these facts have come out and so forth. And that's doing exactly the opposite of what you said we should do.
Yes.
Rather than that, it's like, okay, tell me a little bit about your standards. Tell me a little bit about this, that, and really seeking to understand them. And I would assume that if that happens, and you're right, there are some people that are so closed off that it's not going to make any difference. And that's something we can't control. But for those that are willing to be open a little bit to that, all of a sudden they will share that. And as they share that, then how do we respond to the answer to the questions that we ask them as they tell us, all right, here's my standard, or here's this or that?
Well, so that could play out different ways, but one immediate response would be, "Wow, that's interesting. I have a different standard, and this is my standard. Interesting that we have different standards that somehow we adopt it, through life. And so let's talk about that a little bit, because there we can connect. We can, we're not talking about a universal, it's right or wrong. We're talking about, oh, wow, we're thinking about this differently. That's a very different conversation than pointing fingers and saying, I'm right, you're wrong, and we're in a fist fight, right? So one is just to acknowledge their point of view, their standard, their concerns, their desires. And we can acknowledge, we can disagree, we can take each one apart a little bit if they're willing. So we can find, even if we find one common idea that we share, that's a thread to keep our friendship alive. That's a thread to keep our connection alive.
Well, and I think sometimes we may stop at collaborative, huh? In other words, look, you know what? You and I are friends, and let's just agree to disagree. And that's it. And let's avoid that conversation because we got so many other things that are so good. All right.
Yes,
but
right.
If you can then move into the next step, the creativity, how does that happen? And what happens there?
So if two people are willing to open their hands and have an open-minded, open-hearted conversation, what we're creating in the conversation is space. We're creating an open space in our minds, in the conversation. So think of it as a dialogue that's rather two fists fighting. It's this place of exploration. Like, oh wow, we're really learning from each other, and from that space we go, what's possible? And that's the heart of the creative conversation. What's possible? Can we wonder what else might be? And that's a really lovely conversation because it forces us to get out of our single-minded, linear, rational left brain into our right brain, which is a bigger thinker, connects the dots, has ideas. But that's a different process because it takes courage on our part to go, I have a position, but there's 4 more answers that we haven't thought of. Let's just do it. Let's brainstorm. Now, we all know the word brainstorm, but without understanding conversations, we get into brainstorms. And as soon as somebody says an idea, the next person says, that will never work. We tried it a year ago. And that shuts down the creative conversation,
Well, and you know
right?
what comes to my mind, and it's just very recent. The immigration policy. I mean,
Ah,
you've got those on one side that says absolutely we've got to close those borders, and we've got other people saying, yeah, but you know what? There's some good people that need to come in, that so on and so
mhm.
forth. And
Yeah,
what I've observed just recently, and I don't know where it's going, but I've observed people on both sides coming together and saying, you know what? We need to look at the immigration policy and make changes so that we can do the good that we need to do, but at the same
yeah,
time prevent the bad that we need to prevent. And I
absolutely.
saw that happening, and to me, that's such a great example of how that creativity is coming into place. Whether they're able to do it or not, we'll see.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a whole nother subject. But yeah, no, that's a perfect example. It's such an opportunity to wonder. I wonder what else we could create. I wonder what else is possible. And that's, you have to give up your hold on the truth, and you have to give up on your attachment to your identity to be in that wonder space, to be
Yeah,
in that space of, wow, we could redo this whole damn thing so it really, really works for everybody.
exactly, exactly. And so
Right.
as we move from that creative aspect now to the commitment, what's the difference between creative conversation and commitment conversation?
So, from exploring our stories to being in a good collaborative conversation and then being in a creative conversation is sort of an opening in our
Mhm.
mind. We're thinking bigger, we're more open, we're more humble, and we're getting smart together. The commitment conversation is actually a collapse back into a position, because it says, okay, we've done all this exploration, but now we have to get to work. Who's going to do what by when? So it is how we get things done with other people, and it generates. What's interesting about the commitment conversation that we don't pay much to: every promise you make will change your tomorrow. Every promise you make will affect your relationships with your kids, with your spouse, with your colleagues, with your boss. So this conversation is about someone asks us to do something. We can say yes, we can say no, we can make a counter offer. And that there's a dance there that we don't consciously understand that will help us make better promises rather than what I call sloppy promises, because we do them day in and day out and without much awareness of A, how important they are because they generate our future, and B, uh, how much we can just say yes without even thinking about the consequences of what we're saying yes to.
Okay, and so as we talk about awareness of this whole thing, I know in your book
Mm.
you talk a little bit about meditation, and I think you even have some stuff on your website. Um, Tell me a little bit about meditation and what your thoughts are on meditation, and how important is that or something similar to that to helping people to start to be able to follow these four areas
Mm.
of conversation.
So the reason I put it in the book is it's a sister to awareness, or it's a tool for awareness, um, because the with all the different techniques and all the different methodologies around meditation and all the sometimes like deep Tibetan Buddhist stuff is lovely, but it's incredibly complex. But with all those complexities, when we nail it down, it's like us sitting quietly, observing our own thinking, observing what's going on inside this chamber up here, and that exercise of observation is like being the witness to our thinking, and there, from being a witness rather than being attached to, is similar to what I was talking about earlier. It's a methodology, it's a tool to understand ourselves in a way that Without it, we're in autopilot.
Well, and
That
it's
makes
interesting.
sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And, as I meditate, and I try to do it every day,
Mm,
as I meditate, and the one thing I've learned as I've gone to different courses and so forth is that as we truly meditate, things come up. Things come up. And if we look at those things that come up, and particularly if it's emotions of some sort, and then we
yes.
start to ask the questions you just were sharing with us that, okay, what's the standard here?
Yeah.
Why that emotion? And all of a sudden, through that meditation, if we're able to, as you say, step outside of ourselves and be an
Hmm.
observer, all of a sudden we start to discover. And that was going to be kind of my final question here with you is let's take this communication and conversation that we have with other people and let's talk about the conversation in just a short amount of time that we have with
Mm.
ourselves and with our own life. It applies, doesn't it?
It definitely applies. So, meditation gives us that observation perspective. We become a witness of our own thinking, and as a witness, we can make transform things instead of being in autopilot. And another process that we can do is we all have what in the language philosophy of language world there's our public conversation, and then there's our private conversation. And our private conversation is the monkeys in our mind,
Yes.
or the committee, that's always telling us, what's going on. And I have an exercise in the book that was actually created by Chris Argyris many, many years ago, I think at the Harvard Business School. He was way ahead of his time. I don't think it was well received then, but now it's pretty cool. You literally document a conversation and you divide a piece of paper in half with a line. And on one side, you write a conversation as you were spoken. And on the left side, you write what you were thinking and feeling while both parties were talking. And I've done this with hundreds of people. And the left side, when people actually do this and they write down their private conversation, there's a fair amount of surprise because we just don't pay attention. That chatter is just there running its routine for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, whatever. But when we write it down, we go, oh my gosh, I had no idea I was so judgmental. Because there's curse words, there's like a lot of negativity. So when we look at it, we don't, I'm not criticizing the act, but I'm saying the only option we have, if we bury those things, those thoughts, it's not good for our health. If we speak them out loud, it's not good for a relationship. So we can process our private conversations and find goodness in them because we have concerns that are legitimate. We have standards that we can share and learn from other people's standards. So it's the processing of our private conversations that frees us from the grip they have, that keeps us from being present
Oh, I love
because the chatter is
it.
there.
I love that. I love that. Well, guess what? We have gone through time again. It's just amazing to me how fast time goes by. So, as we close, how do people find your book?
Okay, so there's Amazon and other online places. Better yet, order at your favorite bookstore. Good for the bookstore, good for me. But it's out there and it's alive and well, which is really good, a ring to my heart. Um, and then on my website, I think you can scroll down a little bit and there's a free PDF of the introduction. So all you have to do is put your email in and you get a PDF of the introduction.
Great.
Um,
And
and
website
that's that.
is? What's your website?
Website is chuckwisner.com.
Okay.
ChuckWisner.com. Yeah.
Great. And
And
so,
I'm a little bit on social media, a little bit on Instagram, a little bit
uh
on LinkedIn. Not a heavy user, but I'm there.
okay. And as we close, what would be a final message you want to share with the audience?
These conversational tools take practice. Um, so if you start looking and start observing and start paying attention, look at it non-judgmentally. Try to just look at it as like, wow, I have a pattern that's not serving me well. Maybe I didn't adopt that consciously, but I can look at it now non-judgmentally and just be kind to yourself, so you have the courage to look deeper, which will change every conversation in every relationship you have. So
Wonderful. Wonderful.
yeah.
Chuck, thanks so much. This has been great.
Oh,
Another
thank you.
good conversation here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad this one. I hope this one works out.
Yeah, it does. It did, believe me. So anyway, thanks so much. And folks, I hope you got something good out of this because I sure did. And hopefully you'll get to the book, read the book. I've already read a part of it. It's fantastic. And read the book and hopefully allow it to change your life for the positive. So anyway, this is Dr. Doug. Thanking you for joining us. Hoping you'll join us again soon. Saying namaste.